Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grim Flayer. Hope you're all doing very well today, and I also hope you are ready to rock, because that's right, we are back on BG The Rock, back on Golgari Midrange, and we are debuting on this channel the new Eldraine technology, including 2 copies of Questing Beast, 1 copy of Castle Locthwain, and 1 copy of Murderous Rider. So I am really pumped about this. We are going to play through a league, but before I get into the league, we have a few things to talk about, including why this league is a replay. So I initially planned on making this a live recorded league because that's just kind of fun on the debut to have the off-the-cuff reactions and so on. But then this happened to me yesterday. What you're looking at here, it did afflict a lot of people playing at the time, if not, maybe everybody. I don't exactly know. But anyway, we got booted off by Magic Online for what read as a maintenance issue, but was not planned maintenance. It was some kind of a broader server down situation. And that was really unfortunate because I played one round successfully, and then I was deterministically going to win round 2. I'll talk about that as we go into the replay. Let's not bog the intro down too much. But suffice to say, I got kicked off for a few hours, couldn't resume the league until it was too late to kind of pick up where I left off. So I just said, well, we'll file for reimbursement. And then later last night, after this happened, after I was able to get back on, I finished out the league and said, well, we'll just finish out the league, then we'll try again tomorrow, right? But the league actually turned out pretty cool, all things considered. Despite the lost game, despite all of that, the missing game, that is, so we kind of had to play 6 rounds here to get through a 5-round league. Turned out to be a pretty cool league, so I'm going to show you this league in replay form, partially because it was a cool one, and partially to get you content as soon as possible with the new cards. I normally would have done it over the weekend, but as many of you know, I was called away on a social occasion. So, better late than never, right? And here we are. So we're going to talk about the list very briefly, the final change we've made to it relative to the deck techs. But first we have to thank a few Patreon supporters. We have a brand new Inquisitor on board, OD402. Thank you so much, my friend, for supporting this content. And then we have 3 confidants who we are welcoming into the fold. The first one is a returning patron who had to take a little bit of a break and is now back. So welcome back, Epilol. I do really like to see you again, my friend. Thank you so much. And then we have 2 brand new confidants on top of that, Simone Bernoki and Andreas Larson. So thank you very, very much, and thank you as always to all Patreon supporters. Now, I did make 2 deck techs, one with Fulminator Mage and one without, basically. As you can see, we're playing the one without. Both of those deck techs will be linked in the description if you haven't seen them and you want to know the in-depth ins and outs of the deck. But we are playing the one without Fulminator, and we did have a 15th slot up for grabs, which I have dedicated to a 2nd copy of Abrupt Decay. Now, lots of very valuable advice was given. Thank you so much for participating in the comments there as always, and thank you as always for your really insightful feedback, really consistently good feedback on this channel. And there were a lot of viable options that were presented, but at the end of the day, I did feel called to do 2 things. Number 1, to play another piece of removal in some way, shape, or form. And number 2, to lower the curve a bit, to play something a little bit on the lower end of the mana curve. And that basically narrowed it down to Decay, or I suppose a 4th trophy, versus Engineered Explosives. And it was a tough one. I actually almost registered EE, but I did end up opting for Decay. It's just a really strong card right now, I think. I was happy playing 2 main deck for the period that I was doing so, and I'm happy to bring the second one back. EE would be fine too, but we are playing a pretty threat-dense list, so especially with a couple Hexdrinkers in here, EE might be symmetrical more than we'd like. So we just said, look, we're happy to 1-for-1 them with a really good removal like Decay, because we've got so many ways to 2-for-1 them with our permanents in this particular build, right? So that's the idea, and that is what we're up to. Without further ado, let's go back through this league. Alright, my friends, round 1, game 1, and we've got an interesting hand. We see the new technology of Castle Locthwain showing up right away. It's awkward when it enters the battlefield tapped sometimes, but in this case we don't have anything to do on turn 1 anyway. And it's just kind of a lands and spells hand, but we are on the draw, so in a blind game 1 I think we're supposed to keep this. If we end up really needing early interaction, we might be a little bit behind the 8 ball. But the opponent also mulliganed to 6. They were on the play, they took a mull to 6. So I said, look, against an opponent that's taking a mull, I think this is a fine keep. We just kind of need to draw the 3rd land, and we should be doing okay, unless we really need interaction right out of the gates. And the opponent leads on a Once Upon a Time, casting it for free. The card is pretty nuts. We don't necessarily know exactly what it is, because I'm sure a bunch of decks are playing it, but they go get an Arbor Elf with it, and then they're going to play an Arbor Elf, so right away we assume some kind of a ramp deck. That's all we can really see. And we draw Inquisition, which would be good if the castle didn't ETB tapped. So castle clearly unplayable, obviously terrible. I cut it immediately. You know, just kidding. Just a little bit of unfortunate, little bit of an unfortunate way our things lined up here. So we see the opponent goes Arbor Elf, ramping them into a turn 2 on the play Tireless Tracker. Very frightening. We see Stomping Ground, so Ponza is high on our radar, and we draw Dark Confidant. So it's not the removal we were looking for. We would have loved like a Decay for the Tracker. Was not to be. So what do? Well, there's only 2 really good options here. Number 1 would be Inquisition, because maybe Inquisition is dead beginning next turn. As soon as that, you don't know. Really depends on what their next turn looks like, of course. And the second option is Dark Confidant to start trying to desperately draw what we need. And because we need to make land drops and we need to find kill spells, I think we're pretty much just priced into playing the Bob. Of course, the opponent has a fetch land to follow up the Tracker. We know how good that feels on our side, and now we're on the receiving end. But they have to crack a clue right away, so maybe they don't have the most exciting hand. But they do get to bolt the Bob, which is very bad. And then they're smashing us for 5. Back to us, we draw a second Inquisition. So that's a pretty terrible draw, just because we haven't managed to hit our land drops. Once again, it's either Inquisition or Goyf. Whereas last turn, I was pretty happy with the Bob. Here, I feel more priced into the Inquisition. And we are rewarded for it. If we had let them have the Seasoned Pyromancer, I think it would have been very, very bad for us. However, we're still in trouble. The opponent's got another fetch land for the Tracker and to ramp into this Inferno Titan, and we don't get to do anything else this turn. Pretty horrendous stuff, and the opponent goes ahead and goes on the Tracker plan, making a bunch of clues. We're basically dead. We were basically dead, and then they drew Bloodbraid Elf, which is obviously a great draw into Stone Rain. So they take us off of green, and we are just getting wrecked by Ponza. Absolutely destroyed. Hey, we draw another green land, so sure, we'll play out the Tarmogoyf, we'll make him play it out. But we are simply dead here. The opponent rips a Utopia Sprawl, which is obviously quite good with the Arbor Elf, and then they get to make the Inferno Titan and kill us with a trigger. We could have blocked the Tireless Tracker in that case, but then they just pump the clues. Maybe we buy another turn. I mean, I was just playing it out for the sake of playing it out. There's no way, shape, or form in which we win from there. So, absolutely destroyed game 1 by Ponza. Those of you who have been on this channel for a while may remember a rant or 2 I've gone on in the past about how this deck is my boogeyman. Every story that I have about just absolute horrific luck seems to go back to Ponza. And it doesn't even matter what deck I'm playing on. I've lost horribly to Ponza when I was on mono blue taking turns. Like, the deck just always seems to nut draw me. And, we love that the deck is fairer and slower. The meta's fairer and slower, more interactive now. But the bad news is that means Ponza's playable again. So, it's my boogeyman deck. What more can I say? Now, having said that, I don't think the matchup is really that bad for us. Might not even be bad, period, right? So, let's take a look at the sideboard, see how best to side. Okay, so against Ponza, I think there are two things I'd like to stress here. Number one, we should be siding, I think, relatively conservatively. And number two, you should be siding against what you've seen, because builds do vary. For example, I think Kalitas is a borderline card, probably leaning toward not bringing it in. But if you see they're on a bunch of dragons like Glorybringer and what's the other one? Stormbreath Dragon, then Kalitas is definitely a lot worse than if they're on, like, Bloodbraid Elves and other things that attack along the ground, right? So, definitely keep that in mind, side against what you've seen. The two cards I think we want no matter what are Abrupt Decay, because we do need to kill their ramp. We need to kill Arbor Elves. We need to kill Utopia Sprawl. This can do both. This can also kill Blood Moon. It's just a great, great card. And Murderous Rider, I think, is nice. They do have Planeswalkers out of the side, sometimes even main deck for all I know. And they obviously have a lot of creatures. It is a 2-for-1 with a relevant body in the matchup. So other than that, we could consider Plague Engineer. I think this is way better on the play than the draw, mainly because it's another way to kill their ramp pieces. And that's just more realistic on the play than the draw, for that to matter. A second Collective Brutality might be a little bit loose, but look, if they are playing a lot of Stone Rain effects, plus another way to kill the Mana Dorks, I could see it, and then the aforementioned Kalitas. So we're considering those cards. And in terms of what to come out, well, I think on the play, we want to keep a lot of this stuff, and I chose to move mostly away from Scavenging Ooze, because against Blood Moon, green mana can be at a premium. Against land destruction, green mana can also be at a premium, and they might play some graveyard hate, and it's just kind of one of our less powerful threats in the matchup. Same thing applies to Hexdrinker. I think we just want to pare down a little bit on the mana sinks that do not naturally survive Lightning Bolt. And finally, Questing Beast, the double green, can be a bit rough under the Blood Moon. And I think just one is sufficient here. Again, the land destruction, the Blood Moon, makes me want to move away from QB just a tad. So on the play, I would bring in Rider, Decay, and 2 Plague Engineer. And then we'll see what else they do. Maybe on the draw, Collective Brutality looks a little bit better. Maybe we move a little bit away from Plague Engineer if we take them to Game 3 on the draw, and maybe we revisit some of these cards. But for now, sideboarding against what we've seen, that would be my advice. And we are back, and we are faced with an interesting decision. We do see our one of QB that's a little bit rough in the opener, and obviously this Field of Ruin is no good. But do we mulligan a hand like this? I don't think so, because once again, we just need to draw the third land. Admittedly, it needs to be a black one for us to be off to the races with Lily and Ryder. Really good on the play. We're vulnerable to Blood Moon, but we do have Thoughtseize to take it away. If they're ramping with creatures, we slow them down with Push. I think this is a keep. We just have to hope we hit that third land. Opponent will keep 7 as well. We will indeed begin on the Thoughtseize. They will respond with a Once Upon a Time. Okay, a card is pretty serious business. So they find a Bloodbraid Elf off of it. And then we have an interesting decision. They've got a very powerful hand. It's a 3-land, 4-spell hand, just perfect against us. Obstinate Baloth going to be good against Liliana of the Veil. Stone Rain going to be good in general. Blood Moon we cannot really beat, and then Bloodbraid Elf is a 2-for-1. We want to take any one of these cards, really, besides Baloth, but I do believe we are basically priced into the moon because we simply cannot beat it otherwise. Feels bad. And the opponent goes Forest Utopia Sprawl. Talk about feel bad. Like, we would have taken away the 1-mana Utopia Sprawl for sure if that had been on the table, but that was just the perfect top deck. And we draw another Fatal Push, which is kind of mocking us because, of course, that's how we would stomp most of their ramp, but not the form that they drew, right? And then, of course, it's obvious Stone Rain. Feels bad, but back to us. We do draw an Overgrown Tomb, so that's something. That is definitely something. And the opponent is going to go Wooded Foothills into Bloodbraid Elf into Once Upon a Time. So one of the downsides of this card is that it's pretty overcosted if you're just hard casting it like in the mid game, when you don't necessarily have more mana than you'll ever need, but you still kind of need to use it. Therefore, seems pretty decent alongside Bloodbraid Elf, because you just get to cascade into it. And then they're going to smack us for 3, and we just draw Assassin's Trophy. Feels pretty bad. Feels pretty bad. Opponent's got another Arbor Elf. Okay, could be worse. Try to maintain this here. And then they're going to swing. We take the hit. Second main, they're going to cast the Obstinate Baloth, and we will push said Arbor Elf. So we are definitely under the gun. But once again, the castle shows up, so we're seeing a lot of it. And it comes our way, it enters untapped, which is beautiful. So we had a couple of interesting options there. We could have, of course, just played Liliana and Edicted. But I think our life total, while under pressure, is still high enough that we can afford the life loss of Rider. So I think that's actually the better play, because we get to kill Baloth instead of the Bloodbraid Elf that they'd certainly lose to the Liliana Edict, and we get to hopefully set up to take over the game with Lily. Plus, we're holding up push or trophy in case those should be better plays, right? So I like saying go here, and the opponent will move straight to attacks, and the Baloth will meet a Swift End at the hands of the Rider. Very cool. Liking this card already. So we're down to 7. Opponent plays out a land that we didn't know about, so we are just hoping that they're flooded. Now we draw Tarmogoyf. Very intriguing. So Goyf is actually fairly tempting. We can still hold up push, and it is a massive 5/6. Clogs up the ground really well. The only problem is we are looking a little bit choked on mana. So I would, at the risk of losing Liliana, I did decide to be more mana efficient, play for the higher upside, because make no mistake, we are behind. So Liliana is higher upside because she's more mana efficient, potentially allowing us to have a double spell turn next turn if we draw a land, and also because if they have no way to answer her, then she can start working on the hand, she can take up and set up for another Edict. It's just the highest upside play. The only way we really get punished for this is probably by a haste threat, and they don't have it. So, fine. 1 card in hand, and it's back to us. So we'll tick up. And here's another way we get punished for it. They drew Lightning Bolt. So this turns Liliana into asymmetrical discard in our opponent's favor. So, ooh, just kind of eating it at the hands of Ponza here. So what do we do? What do we do? Well, we could pitch QB because it's uncastable, but the opponent has now given us a Field of Ruin target, so we can fix our mana this turn and maybe cast Goyf, or we could just pitch Swamp, which does seem a little loose, admittedly against Blood Moon, and keep all the gas in our hand. Lots of options here, but I did choose to keep our threats, pitch a Fatal Push. We're past the point of caring about most threats, most creatures of any kind, ramp or threat, that we can push. We have Trophy anyway for that, so instead we're going to fix our mana, insulate ourselves a bit from Blood Moon, and play the Goyf. So, pretty decent turn for us, and the opponent is totally top deck dependent. The only problem is they did have that Relic. We've got to run the Goyf out into Relic. Now, one reason to maybe have considered pitching the Goyf is, of course, because it's bad against Relic. I don't think that's correct, because they are definitely cashing in the Relic ASAP anyway, because they are flush with mana and they need action, right? So the sooner we make them cash that in, the quicker we can rebuild our Goyf into a credible threat. So they do rip a Bloodbraid Elf off the top. That's very, very rough. Admittedly, they only cascade into Utopia Sprawl. Not that bad, but this is still like just the worst time. It's the only time with our hand we can't really handle a Bloodbraid Elf. So they found the right window for it. And then they also found a Blood Moon. Pretty annoying. We do have the out to it, but it does mean we've got to do a few things here. So if we want to get out from under the Blood Moon, we've got to Trophy the Moon. And then if we want to play anything else, we've got to Fetch and go to 3. That's a lot more dangerous than 4 because they've got a Bloodbraid Elf on the field and because they have Lightning Bolt in the deck. But we are locked out otherwise. So as bad as it feels for all of the above reasons, plus having to spend the trophy on a moon rather than on a game-winning threat, well, that's just kind of what we have to do. So pretty rough, but we go ahead and get a basic, of course. cast the Murderous Rider. So Rider providing us with a platform to do some pretty nice things here. It's been a nice one. And we do attack here with the Goyf because we just cannot play scared. You know, yes, they can top deck some things that punish us for this. They can also top deck some things that straight up kill us. So it is definitely correct there, in my view, to start trying to end the game. But of course, because it's Ponza and because I'm against it, they rip a Chandra Torch of Defiance, killing our Murderous Rider and ending the game with Bloodbraid Elf. So feels real bad. That Blood Moon made it so we couldn't play QB, and I guess Questing Beast would have died just the same to Chandra, right? But if the Blood Moon also made us have to fetch, if we didn't have to fetch, hey, you know, we're down to 1, but the QB gets to come down, gets to attack, block, and answer Chandra all at the same time. Who knows? We're at least making a game of it while the Goyf contributes to the clock as well. But Ponza basically had the right top decks at the right time here in Game 2, starting with that turn 1 draw of Utopia Sprawl right after we Thoughtseize them. Pretty rough stuff, my friends, but hey, you know what? We saw the new tech. All 3 of our new additions showed up. We didn't get to cast QB this round. Castle, we didn't have the luxury to activate either, but Rider looked pretty good, and we are getting to see the tech. So, got stomped out by Ponza, feels bad, and that's our round 1, though. We've got 4 more rounds to play, but first, I'm going to tell you about the game that never was. Okay, my friends, so as I mentioned in the beginning, there was a server outage, and I lost the game that I was deterministically going to win. We were against Blue-White Control. Very cool opponent, by the way. We had some fun chatting throughout the game, but we were ahead by over 2 minutes on the clock, and the opponent was down to 2 minutes, and the board state was, his board was empty, our life was at 20, there was just no possible way they could kill us in the allotted time, and then boom, the server went down. But I do just want to take a moment to tell you about it, because the new tech looked really, really decent there. So this was kind of a big blue-white version. They had at least 2 copies of Jace, a lot like this list, and at least 1 copy of Tefero, Hero of Dominaria, alongside the now very familiar War of the Spark 3-drop Planeswalkers. I also saw a lot of the usual stuff. You know, again, this is just kind of a list I pulled off of the top 8, but just to give you an idea of the type of blue-white control list we were against, we saw Celestial Purges out of the side. We saw a lot of the usual suspects, Supreme Verdict, of course, and all of the new tech was pretty cool. I do think that overall the MVP was the discard spells, which just happened to come at pretty good times. But Questing Beast, the opponent ripped a Logic Knot. It was the only unknown card, and they happened to have it for the QB that we ripped off the top. Otherwise, the Beast would have absolutely flipped one of the games on its head. Castle Locthwain actually buried the opponent once. We activated it 2 or 3 times before they found a Field of Ruin. And if they didn't find the field, they were not pressuring us whatsoever. It would have been even worse. But as it was, that was very, very valuable, needless to say, in this sort of matchup. And Rider was actually sweet. There was actually a scenario in which the opponent was empty-handed and at 8 life. And and both boards are empty. I draw Murderous Rider. I have only a fetch land in hand. And it was a really interesting question as to whether to hold up the Rider to try to get the 2-for-1 and try to answer a Planeswalker, or to simply deploy it. I simply deployed it. I said, let's try to close out the game with a 2-3, and it worked. So definitely showing the versatility of the card there. Of course, a lot of the times against blue-white control, you need the Rider to answer the Planeswalkers, and then casting the Rider at a later stage of the game is more of an afterthought. It's not an afterthought on the value axis, because that's why the card is good, because it allows us to 2-for-2 or 2-for-1, whatever the case may be. We're keeping parity. But usually Swift End is really why it's good in the matchup, and then the Zombie Knight is the follow-up. But it does go to show you that compared to a reactive card like Pulse Decay or Trophy, the ability, even in that matchup, to just cast it as a 2-3 is highly relevant. So again, we were deterministically winning that game, and then the server shut us down. So we do have 4 more leagues to play, so I'm showing you the full 5 leagues here, or the full 5 matches here, rather, but just wanted to give you a little taste of how that matchup went, just so you know that the new tech is looking really, really nice against blue-white control. Alright, my friends, it is time for round 2, and we are once again faced with a keep that kind of requires us to draw another land, but once more on the draw, I think it's reasonable that in the first 3 turns, drawing any land is quite likely. Field can, of course, help fix our mana. Most of our lands that we naturally draw will make black. So, double Tarmogoyf as the floor, and then, of course, once we find any other land, we are pretty much good to go. Drawing a green-black spell, especially Trophy, not very good, but we're just going to say go. Opponent went Seachrome Coast, and then passed. And then they play another one. Then they're going to play Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. Very interesting indeed. So, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is humans, but, you know, double Seachrome Coast and no turn 1 play, I was actually not certain at all that I was against humans. I was, in fact, a little bit skeptical, so I therefore decided to just main phase Fatal Push in case of something like Spell Queller or some other way to blow out removal. So we'll just take our 1-for-1 while we can. Hope they don't have another one, right? Always feels bad to kill a Thalia, kill a Legendary, and then they have another one that would have been rotting in hand, but we go for it, and the opponent will play Field of Ruin, so definitely not a human's land, and then they'll simply pass. So are we suspicious of Queller? I don't know. It's hard to say. It is hard to say, but on our draw step, the opponent will start fielding us, and does make our mana a little bit worse, not that big a deal, so we're just going to go ahead and run out a Tarmogoyf. Hold up Fatal Push. Seems like a fine thing to do anyway. And then the opponent has Deputy of Detention. So Deputy, of course, can only target Goyf. Our Goyf will have left the battlefield satisfying the conditions for Revolt. So we let that happen, and then end step we push the 3-drop and get our Goyf right back. Then we draw Hexdrinker. So again, you know, we see where, you know, this could be blue-white spirits that has a kind of non-spirit oriented draw. Could be some kind of taxes deck, so I think we definitely want to do something here main phase, and I chose to go with Drinker over Goyf because it is less soft to further effects like Deputy of Detention, and lets us be fully mana efficient this turn, pumping 2 levels on, smacking him for 3. Back to the opponent, and it is a Stoneblade deck. Whatever else they are up to, they are packing the Stoneblade package, and Batterskull is the find. Then it's back to us. No 4th land for the opponent, nor for us. So we are suspicious maybe of Path to Exile. We have drawn Collective Brutality, so that's a pretty decent draw. I think the first thing to do is to try to draw out any path they might have or anything else by putting a level on. Okay. That resolves, so we have a level 4, or a 4/4 level 3 pro instant, so let's attack before we give the opponent any other info. And then they path Goyf, so they're not respecting the Hexdrinker. That leads me to believe that they have another way to deal with it that's not an instant, whether it be a Deputy or a bounce effect or something like that. So we should keep that in mind. And we, of course, go get our second black off of that path, which is pretty good. And then I really like Collective Brutality here, because if they do have another Deputy or something like that, then Brutality could not kill it. So we'd rather spend Brutality than Decay here. And, you know, Brutality escalated may or may not hit. If we look at the hand, who knows? But our hand is good enough that I did not wish to risk it. So back to the OP. And they have another Deputy of Detention, which we kind of saw coming, another Seachrome Coast as well. So it's going to be back to us, and we draw Blooming Marsh, which is all well and good, but it's certainly Liliana time. And once again, Hexdrinker allows us to be mana efficient. Even though the opponent is answering it, we are still having mana efficient turns on the back of its level up ability. And, you know, there's something to be said for that. So Opponent draws a Field of Ruin, and then they'll play a Charming Prince, some new Eldraine technology that is seeing play in a few different decks. Nice, versatile little bear that you can main deck, and in this case it will simply be a 2-2 that scries 2. And then the opponent will pass it back over to us. Alright, so we draw Swamp. Alright, what do? Well, we could play the Swamp, because that could in theory allow us to try to empty out our entire hand and then take up with Liliana. I think that's definitely reasonable, but if the opponent is on a Spell Queller and they're really disciplined with it, that could actually come back to haunt us. So I think instead of going for that super high upside play, I don't feel we need to. I think it's a pretty free pitch to Liliana, so we're just going to tick her up before we do anything else. And we get a path out of the opponent's hand. Alright, so I think that decision does pay off. Then we are going to try to draw out another path, which it seems like they may or may not have, with levels on the Hexdrinker, and sure enough, they were sitting on the third path to exile of the game. And we're out of basics, so there goes Hexy. Now, we know the only card they have left in hand is Batterskull, and once again, I am disinclined to play at instant speed if I don't have to, because they could be on Queller, they could be on other effects. If you're against a blue-white Taxes deck, I think you should just kind of play around those things most of the time, even if you haven't seen them. So, therefore, even though Goyf is sort of safe to play, they'd have to maybe draw another, like their fourth path or their third deputy to punish us. I'm just going to play it safe and decay the Prince because we are ahead. Again, we don't need to make the most optimal plays, we just need to stay ahead. Opponent will play the Batterskull, and this is perfect because they still have a card in hand, so we get to empty out our hand. We play the land we just found, we play the Goyf, we trophy the skull. Germ goes away, and then, of course, we get to tick Lily up, getting rid of another Stoneforge Mystic, so that was a wonderful, wonderful turn. Back to the opponent. What have they found? They drew another SFM, so the opponent definitely keeping the threat density nice and high, and they go to get a Sword of Light and Shadow. That's a little bit scary, to be honest. And, of course, they will just cast it here, playing around the Liliana +1. So, definitely a card that can get them back into the game because the protection from black is really relevant, and they can buy back these things that we've killed. Could spin out of control pretty quickly. So we hope to draw immediate removal for it. Instead, we draw land. Not very good, but we do get to Edict. We do get to force them to find more action off the top. They're on a 2-turn clock because our Goyf is huge. The opponent rips a Reflector Mage immediately off the top. That is extremely good. Not only is it a creature just like they needed, it of course gets to bounce and tempo our Goyf out of the game for a couple turns, so a little bit scary. Definitely not the greatest, but then we rip the QB. What a great top deck right now. This is going to come down, and it's going to make life a lot trickier for the opponent. We'll put Liliana back to 2, of course, and then we will play the QB. And they don't have protection from green, so QB gets to get aggressive here, and the opponent either has to go to 4, or they have to take the hit. Or they have to take the trade, and it would be a trade. So, definitely a really fine way to start pressuring the opponent and block for the Lily, and block against the sword trigger if they were to attack us. And the opponent just rips a land for a turn, so finally they have run out of gas. And then they'll attack. They're going after Lily. I think we'd take the trade here kind of no matter what. We just want to keep their board nice and clear. And remember, they would gain life off of this, so it's not like we could just let them through and swing back. Unless they were attacking Lily. Maybe they were attacking us, actually. I'm not sure. I think they were attacking us, but either way, doesn't matter. QB doing the work, keeping the board clear, and we get to play the Goyf back to the opponent, and they're just going to scoop it up. So, yeah, Questing Beast. We have talked before about how good this card is going to be. Here's something I haven't mentioned yet. I think that mid-range players in general, myself probably included, maybe we saw this when I was trying to evaluate Hexdrinker right out of the gates when it was first spoiled. I think we mid-range mains tend to undervalue threats because we can win the game with a 2-1 that damages us, getting in 10 times. We can win the game when Scavenging Ooze is a literal grizzly bear. We can win the game with these underwhelming threats because we interact so well, and because we disrupt so well, and because we accrue advantage so well. And that's the right mindset to have. But remember that Tarmogoyf is literally nothing but a big threat, and it's one of the best cards in our deck. So I think we do, as a community, tend to undervalue threats a little bit more. And I think some people maybe have undervalued QB. I'm definitely really high on the card, and you saw there just how good it was. It just allows you to have your cake and eat it too in these types of situations. You attack and you block, and if you're ahead, it's a good way to close out the game while maintaining your onboard dominance. And if you are behind, it's a good way to start turning the corner while staying alive. So absolutely awesome cameo there from the QB. And we do get their game one against blue-white Stoneblade Taxes. Alright, my friend, so here I will repeat my advice from game one. In an archetype like this, when it's sitting across the table from you, you really want to sideboard against what you've seen, because there are definitely some flexibility, a great deal of flexibility in these blue-white Taxes decks in general, even before Stoneforge Mystic became unbanned. So with SFM in there, they could be playing a whole lot of different stuff, so we need to sideboard against what we've seen. What I am thinking here is that we could bring out these 8 cards and add in these 8 cards. So I think cutting a land is pretty good in these grindy matchups in general, especially on the draw, which we will be for game 2. Now, if the opponent does show us Leonin Arbiter, then I don't like to side out a land against Arbiter decks, but Arbiter and SFM are a non-bow, so we don't expect that until we've seen it. Then from there, I think cutting a few discard spells while leaving some in is fine. We hedge a little bit, leaving one Thoughtseize in case they're playing like Restoration Angel, stuff like that, but mostly respecting our life total with Inquisition. Cutting a Lily on the draw is pretty free, and I do like trimming away one Scooze because they're not putting things into the graveyard, basically, only we are, and one Hexdrinker because it can be clunky against those effects like Deputy of Detention and Reflector Mage. And I actually don't mind sometimes siding out one Tarmogoyf against like these blue aggro decks where Tarmogoyf doesn't get as big. Merfolk is another example. There are lots of natural predators for Tarmogoyf. It doesn't help us grind. It's still a great card, but I could also, because they're white-blue, not be surprised at all to see a Rest in Peace out of the opponent. So I like trimming around the edges like that. Very happy with that sideboarding. And then we've got 8 great cards to bring in. I think 3 copies of Plague Man is pretty sweet. They're not necessarily playing all that many X1s, but there are some, and I'm sure. And there are a lot of X2s we could double up on. It's just a fine card in general. The debuff is relevant. The Death Touch is relevant. Kalitas is awesome here. I think we want everything that we can that's a kill spell, especially that kills Stoneforge Mystic, so in comes Brutality. Murderous Rider, another great 2-for-1 kill spell. Decay is awesome. And I like a cheeky one of Collector Ouphe, just as a bear that can randomly hose a Stoneforge Mystic dependent progression. I wouldn't go too deep on the Ouphe, and again, this is subject to change based on what else we see out of their deck, but based on what we saw in Game 1, this is how I sided. Let's check out Game 2. Okay, so opponent keeping 7, we've got a 6-lander and a trophy. Yes, Peatland's a redraw, but that's still a mull, and then we mull to a no-land 7. Obviously got to throw that one back too, and we're down to 5. Now this would be a great 7, especially on the play. Problem is, we're on the draw, and we got to pare it down to 5, so what do? Well, I think we've got to ditch a land, and I just chose to pick Field of Ruin. The rest of our stuff all kind of works well enough together to the point where hopefully the downsides won't be too bad, and QB has to go just simply because it's a 4-drop, so we're going to try to beat them with this 5. Admittedly, it is a pretty good 5, but wish we were on the play with a hand like this, and the opponent goes turn 1, Giver of Runes. So Tarmogoyf is the play, and this was a mistake. I definitely should have just played out Castle Locthwain. I did think, I'm just Not used to playing with the land yet. That's basically what it comes down to. Kind of forgot the ETB tapped clause. And then that missequencing becomes the least of our worries because the opponent has next leveled us. They are on Leonin Arbiter despite also being on Stoneforge Mystic, and they have a Ghost Quarter out, so we are in deep trouble. So I don't know whether this is a non-bow that they're just living with because both cards are definitely game-winning strategies, or whether this is a transformational sideboard plan, like they go turn 1 Stoneforge, turn 2 side out the Mystics, and bring in the Arbiters. I have no idea. But either way, was not expecting this. And here we deploy the castle. We could go Peatland and then Brutality, or we could go castle and hold up push. 6 of one, half dozen of the other here, really. And either way, against the Arbiter GQ progression on the play, it's a little bit rough. Sadly, we cannot push the Arbiter. It's being protected by the Giver. We wanted to give the opponent the chance to maybe attack with the Giver, get a little bit greedy, but they don't. And they're just going to GQ us. They're just going to Stone Rain us, or Wasteland us, rather, and then play another Giver. So we're going to push this one. Again, we can't hit their Arbiter yet. Then they play a Fueled, and they pass. So back to us. Dark Confidant, pretty good draw. Definitely not a bad draw at all. But we just have to kill the Arbiter before it does even more damage. And that's what Brutality is for. No escalation, because our hand is great. And we just have to hope the opponent doesn't aggro us out, basically. I think we do have a chance to get out from under the Multi-5. Opponent will once again scry 2 with the Charming Prince, and then smack us for 1. So back to us. We draw a third land. Pretty nice to hit that, and we could play Liliana here in Edict, but their board is not that high value right now. I would rather try to start drawing out of our disadvantage with the Bob, while also setting up the board state by which we can take over the game with Liliana, maybe in a couple turns. Opponent really punishes us for the decision to play a creature by bouncing it with a Reflector Mage, so that sucks. Hitting us for 3. And then we draw another land, so the land is fine. Unfortunately, we can't have a double spell turn. Once again, the Liliana Edict is just not that appealing, so I'm going to try to fade another Reflector Mage, play out the Goyf, and sit behind the big green wall. Opponent continuing to make land drops as well. Hanged Executioner, here's the one you don't see every day, but it's actually kind of a spicy one. It's a 1/1 flyer for 3 that makes another 1/1 white flyer when it ETBs. And then you can spend 4 and exile it to exile target creature. So it is a 2-for-1 that can then become a different sort of 2-for-1, basically. Plus, both halves of the card do wield a blade pretty darn well. So definitely a nice one, definitely a little bit scary. Because right now, let's see what happens during attacks. Yeah, nothing. Our Tarmogoyf is walling off their attacks, but next turn they can send him to the Executioner. So we've got to dig for action. We crack Peatland, find another Bob, not very good, and then another land. Okay, I mean, this does at least allow us to have a double spell turn, and I guess that's what we're going to do. But once more, not the most appealing. So we expect to lose the Goyf to something, and then we expect maybe to trade one Bob off, and hopefully the other one can help us stay in the game with some lucky hits, but we are definitely getting aggroed out as things stand. So the opponent will send in their whole board besides Giver, and then they also have a path, so this is just extra bad. What they were showing on board was bad enough, but the path is just pretty much GG. So I'm going to sign a block with the Bob, try to trade. The opponent can blow us out with the Giver, but we've got to block in some way, shape, or form. I don't mind losing a Bob. And hey, the opponent chooses not to. So good enough for me. I guess they're playing around removal we might have. And then they have Sword of Light and Shadow as their last card. Well, that's pretty rough. That is definitely not what we wanted to see. And then Bob will flip Questing Beast, hitting us for 4. Oof. This game is not going our way. And then we have Scooze for turn, which is all well and good, but it's not going to be enough. we cannot beat their board, including Sword of Light and Shadow. No matter what we do, they can just equip a flyer and swing for lethal, or just about lethal. Even if we gain a life with Scooze, it's still going to be lethal plus the tokens. So either way, we were very far behind. They've also got Giver to force the damage through in other ways as well. Definitely not our game. So that was unexpected. We definitely were not in the market to get GQ'd and arbitered out of the game. Granted, we answered it in a relatively timely fashion before it totally wrecked us, and our draws were decent, but it was still not enough. It was still not enough having mulled to 5 on the draw, so they got us, and we have to try to come back here in Game 3. Alright, my friends, once again, our land base is not quite complying. We're seeing a lot of just 2-landers, with one of them being field or an ETB tapped land. Rather unlucky. Granted, we are on the high end of utility with our land base, so maybe it's something worth keeping an eye on, but it's a fine hand. Double Fatal Push is awesome, and we have a couple early threats, the 2-for-1 of Rider. Hand is sweet. As always, it seems we need to hit our 3rd land, right? But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Turn 1 Giver for the opponent, which we will answer on their end step with a push. And we draw Lily. Well, that's not a 3rd land, it's something else that demands the 3rd land, right? But good card. Let's see if we can get there. We'll say Tarmogoyf and go. The opponent goes Ghost Quarter, Charming Prince. Once again, scrying the day away. So back to us. Can we draw the land? We cannot. Very, very rough. So what do we do? Well, the obvious thing is just to play out the Tarmogoyf and attack. Or rather attack, then play out the Tarmogoyf. The big problem with that is it walks right into a Deputy of Detention. It could be bad against some other must-answer threats. So while that I think is still reasonable, it's also reasonable to just play out Scooze. I'm not that high on Scooze either because our 3-drops are so good. Our hand in general is so good that realistically it's going to be a bear for a long time. Even if we draw another green land, which we might not. The land we find might not be green, right? So instead I'm just holding up Fatal Push. It's not mana efficient, but I believe it is the safest thing to do, and arguably the highest upside thing to do, but we'll see. Opponent just plays another GQ and passes. So even though Fatal Push is a high value card, we do want to be mana efficient as well. I'm going to push the Charming Prince here on the end step. Could become a problem down the road, just clogging up the board, making our Edict worse, right? So we untap, we draw Swamp. Nice. That's what we wanted to see. Might as well attack first. Liliana may not grow the Goyf, so let's just attack, conceal info. Maybe get them to throw a path our way. Or if they're like their best play is path, but they don't want to give us the 3rd land, we don't want to show them that they have it, right? So either way, I do like attacking first. We connect, and then we do just have to jam the Liliana here. Holding up Murderous Rider is decent, but I think the upside of playing Liliana here is sufficient to try it. And they're not showing us anything but double GQ in planes, right? So what could they really have? Well, they're going to pull the old GQ myself trick to get an island, and then they've got Spell Queller. So yeah, that's pretty spicy play from the opponent. They did wasteland themselves to do so, but they did quell our Liliana successfully, and then they have a Giver to protect the Queller. So we need to answer the Queller right now. Fortunately, my friends, the Rider is on our side. So let's just main phase it, of course. It resolves, beautiful. That lets us get our Liliana back, and we get to main phase her activation. I might as well take care of that Giver. Ticking up is potentially okay as well, but I really like taking the guaranteed Edict value. And then, as always, Goyf is just smashing in for 3 per turn. Gotta love it. So, back to the opponent. Field of Ruin into Deputy of Detention. Yep, so this is a card we've been aware of since turn 3, I believe, of Game 1 of this match, and it shows up yet again, taking away our Tarmogoyf. And it's back to us. We draw yet another Tarmogoyf. So, sure, would have preferred something else, but I do think it's the best pitch there. So we'll tick up, we get an Arbiter out of the opponent's hand, and then we're just going to dump out our hand, make our Liliana better in the future in terms of +1ing and also protecting her as well as we can right now. It's also worth mentioning that the fact you're casting Rider from exile actually is really, really nice alongside Liliana. It means you can get Hellbent and then still have access to plays. Definitely one of the less obvious synergies of the card. Opponent will play out a Hanged Executioner, then they've just got to pass. We draw Hissing Quagmire. Okay, so let's move straight to attacks, and we're going to attack with both because we're bluffing all kinds of stuff right now. We're bluffing removal, we're bluffing ooze activations. It's really going to make our opponents have no good blocks. So because they've got no good blocks, we're going to go ahead and just attack, and then before damage, we'll activate once. That's going to get an extra point of damage across, of course, gain us a life, and let us have an asymmetrical discard the following turn, which I do rate more highly than ticking down on that wide board. And we get Fire and Ice out of their hand. That's pretty good. And then, of course, we get to cast the back half of Rider to protect Liliana and to continue going wide. Feels good, feels good. So it's over to the opponent. They're actually sending both things at Liliana, which is a really interesting attack because it puts them very shields down as far as blocking, and it doesn't even take care of Liliana. So the only way that attack makes sense at all is if they have removal of some kind in hand or like a flash blocker or something like that. So we've got to bear that in mind. Back to us, we draw Dark Confidant. Okay, so once again, we could take a couple different routes here, but once again, I'm going to opt to simply attack first because it makes, with the ooze activations and the bluff, it does make the opponent's decisions a lot more complicated. Rather than firing up Quagmire, also if we fire up Quagmire and then we tick Liliana up, we've got to lose our Bob. I don't think that's worth it. I think we should just attack. Opponent will assign the block here against Rider, where both things will live. And then they're going to field the Quagmire in Declare Blocker. So, of course, we'll float green, go get another land, use the green before it expires, and then the opponent's going to path us. Well, that's definitely something that was on our radar. It does make a lot of sense. And we're going to kind of strike a balance between eating enough to get a nice buffer to our life total here, while still leaving plenty of food in the graveyard for future scoozes or for, make sure Tarmogoyf stays big, all that good stuff. So we put the opponent to 1 this way, and then, of course, we get to run out the Bob, take up the Lily, get a Giver of Runes out of the opponent's hand. Back to the opponent, they're going to take their draw step, and whatever it was is not sufficient to beat us. We stabilized so well in this game, my friends. We took over. And as mentioned, we always try to engineer situations in which Liliana of the Veil can take over the game. And she definitely did a lot of work here, ended up getting a ton of value for us. But what was, in many ways, the major enabler for that was Murderous Rider. Freeing Liliana from the clutches of Spellqueller, getting her back, letting her edict that same turn, taking care of the Giver, clearing their board, and then Rider coming down, protecting our Liliana, pressuring the opponent. Awesome, awesome cameo. Once again from the new tech, this time Rider was looking like the best one of the bunch, but the core cards of Liliana, Tarmogoyf, Fatal Push also more than pulling their weight. And in this type of matchup, our card quality just tends to shine through. If we can keep pace with their I win effects like Ghost Quarter plus Arbiter and not get taxed too heavily out of a reasonable early progression, eventually, the card quality of Tarmogoyf, Dark Confidant, and Liliana of the Veil is just higher card quality than anything they're up to, except maybe Stoneforge Mystic. So, yeah, definitely a fun matchup, and we did get there. We're back to 1-1 in the league. We're on the board. Let's go to round 3. And here we are for round 3, having won the die roll for the first time this league, I believe including the game that didn't count against Blue-White Control that we talked about. Sadly, we cannot keep this. The curve is pretty high, and it's a lone forest for our mana, so we've got to throw it back. And this is an okay 6 if the opponent is not interacting much, I guess. But certainly better than going to 5. Seems like a fine Game 1 hand. And We'll send it over to the opponent. Opponent goes Scalding Tarn, fetching Watery Grave, Thoughtseizing. Well, that's the opposite of not interacting. They take away one of our 2 spells, and we promptly draw Forest. So, looking pretty bad for us. We appear to be against Grixis Shadow. And the fact that they took Scooze instead of Bob means that they definitely have a kill spell for Bob. That said, I think we still are supposed to play it out, make them use it right now. Conceal information, make their discard worse, right? If they have more discard spells, maybe they cast it and they whiff or something. So we run out the Bob, the opponent goes Blood Crypt, push back to us, and we continue drawing nothing but lands. So this is an opportunity to get Castle down, but it's actually not accomplishing anything quite yet. So instead, I am going to get really aggressive with this Field of Ruin, take them off of red. They happen to tap the red source, so now we're going to hit it before they can untap with it, right? So normally we'd want to wait to the draw step to increase the odds that we just Stone Rain them, but that way they could float red, let it resolve, they'd have 3 mana, they could, K-Command or whatever the red card in their hand might be, so instead we just main phase it. End step, the opponent will Thought Scour, milling another Thought Scour and a Shadow. They've got another fetch land, so they're back on red mana despite our best efforts. And it is going to be Gurmag Angler. Little scary. Back to us, we draw another land. You could not make it up. So, a couple options. We could play the castle and start drawing cards. Problem with that is our hand is so full. This is one of many reasons the flood is so bad. I would love to have just been trading resources this whole time and then go on the castle plan now. But not only are we having to deal with the angler, the castle activation would currently make us lose 4 life. So that's not a very winning line. Instead, we're just going to once again try to strand some cards in their hand, make their hand worse. We aggressively attack red once again. And that's all we got. So we got a pass. Not the greatest, that's for sure. We have been flooding to hell and back after a mulligan. And now 4 hits from the fishy, we will be done for. Opponent keeps drawing fetch lands as well, so we're unable to keep them off of red. They do main phase fetch a tapped land. I don't know what that's about. Maybe they bobbled themselves, I don't remember. Didn't see what they liked off the bobble and just knew they were going to fetch. We draw Thoughtseize. Sure, that's a fine one. Push, bobble. So this is a little rough because we do have a window to kill the angler. It's not being protected by Stubborn Denial. If we drew Trophy or Liliana or any of our good cards, we would be just fine. But we don't. So we could have taken away Bobble, and that would make them less likely to eventually dig toward a counterspell. But we have a lot of really good draws that would get fatal pushed otherwise, so I think taking a push there is fine. Opponent does rip a discard spell and it will blank. They're going to run out Bobble. And then they are going to, I can only assume, accidentally skip past their attack phase. So opponent said, wow, they're really flooded, I feel bad, let's give them a turn off. So I appreciate that, OP. And we, of course, get kind of a free castle activation off of that. And what else would we find but another land? At least this one has some utility, so it's another land, and it's a fatal push. So we just can't get our hand empty to make castle better. We just can't draw so many good cards that are in our deck. Opponent rips another discard spell, but because our push is dead in hand, they just get to take it. So, definitely not good. Definitely not good. We are on the ropes because we have flooded so hard. And we get one more castle activation at least. Let's try to find something great off of it. We find Collective Brutality. Not the very best, but we do find Liliana, and that makes Collective awesome, because Collective now gets to clear the way in case the one unknown in their hand is literal Stubborn Denial. We get to check for that, and even though we might get blown out by the stub, we definitely still want to escalate the upside for the life drain at this stage is high enough to make that good. And wouldn't you know it, the opponent had a stub, so the progression has been pretty rough, but we do finally get to answer the angler. And now we're forcing the opponent to find some stuff off the top, which they definitely can, but we have given ourselves a shot. They've got nothing to play to the board. It's back to us. We rip yet another land. The flood, the flood, the flood. So all we can do is take up the Lily. We get that push out. And then we are at 2 life. We've got exactly 1 castle activation still available to us. And I think that's better than attacking for 2 with Quagmire at this stage of the game. And even though it's bad against discard, we will main phase it. We can cast almost anything in our deck right now except Questing Beast. So, Trophy, sure. Yeah, that's a great example of something that's fine to have in our hand because we can fire it off whenever. Opponent will bobble. They'll crack it. And then they're going to pass. So end step partially because Liliana is going to be ticking up next turn because they didn't play a threat. And partially before they get the draw off of Bobble for a potential Kolaghan's Command or maybe Lightning Bolt if they're on that, we are going to trophy the red land on the end step. We have been really aggressively trying to take them off of red. And while it's not something you should prioritize over casting actual spells on actual targets, it's actually, beyond that, definitely a useful thing to do. So, Liliana ticking up. I did choose to tick up rather than pitch Urborg because it is possible that we draw another Field of Ruin and we eventually field the Watery Grave. We don't want to make this island able to produce black. Also, if they have like removal plus counterspell in hand, maybe they pitch the removal here because maybe it just makes their decision a lot more complicated is the point if we don't show them what's in our hand, right? So they pitch Stub, sure. Sadly, we can no longer activate Castle because we were so flooded for so long, but Castle drew us 3 cards, and if we were not so uncharacteristically flooded, would be drawing us more. The opponent had a Stub in hand, they have Dismember, they kept the Dismember, fair enough, so they answer the Quagmire, but hey, we're still ahead, we have a Liliana on 3, the opponent has nothing, and if we ever gain any life, we can activate the Castle again. Opponent found a land. And we found a land as well, but ours is better. So we play the Peatland, take up the Lily, crack the Peatland, see what we can see, and it's an Inquisition. Oh man, our draws and our progression has been depressingly bad. So back to the opponent, they play nothing. We cast Inquisition. Honestly, we could take the Liliana up 2, would be similar, but if they have Snapcaster Mage in hand, I guess it's probably better to force it out this way than maybe tick down with Liliana. But either way, we have enough mana where it's fine to just cast this. And the opponent had a K command, which would have, of course, been Lethal Rotting in hand. So all of our endeavor toward taking them off of red finally worked. You'll note that they also fetched, but didn't have any more red shocklands to get. So they just get another Watery Grave. And then it's Goyf time. And so our position is actually really good. We have a Liliana on 5. The opponent has to find something really good this turn. And we draw Fetch Land, so our flood continues. We'll tick up, and the opponent has found Snapcaster Mage, which is exactly what they needed. I think it's one of the only things that is an actual out for them at this stage of the game, besides... It's one of the only singleton cards, that is, because, again, they don't have red mana, and nothing else has the reach, if you will, to kill us, so... They, of course, push the Goyf, and we are just done for. So, if we were playing around Snapcaster Mage, we could maybe have extended the game by attacking with the Goyf. Maybe they snap in, push it, and then we still have the Edict. Maybe I should have done that. I don't know. It's a really tough call. But either way, I think we can definitely say we were on the unlucky side of proceedings here, having mulled to 6, having flooded so ridiculously hard, and then still almost getting there on the back of Liliana and Castle Locthwain. But always interesting games against Grixis Shadow. This was no exception, and we just barely dropped it to him. Let's take a look at the sideboard. Okay, my friends, so a couple interesting things to talk about with how to side against Grixis Shadow. So I think these 5 cards are all nailed on. Rider is yet again looking great here as a 2-for-1. Decay is pretty nice. In the past with... You might have seen me side out like a Decay or even a push against Shadow. That's when I had more removal, like a an EE and a second Pulse on my side, maybe a Damnation. These days, I think we actually want to bring in our extra spot removal that, even though it can't hit Angler, these builds are not quite as dependent on Angler as they used to be anyway, it seems. They're more likely to be things like Jace Vryn's Prodigy floating around. Kalitas is very, very nice value here in multiple different ways. Finks is another really good 2-for-1 value piece, and Spellbomb as a 1-of is great, if you ask me, in this matchup. Now, Plague Engineer is also good, but it's mostly a Death Touch thing that can trade with Shadow and Angler. That might also get the body of a Snapcaster Mage out of the way. Definitely fine, but I don't know that we need all three. And then Ashiok, I would hesitate to probably bring in more than one, but one is viable. I actually chose not to, but I would be receptive to an argument in favor of doing so. They play a lot of fetch lands. That's definitely reasonable. Hitting their graveyard once or twice to keep them off of Angler and good Snapcaster targets is reasonable. On the other hand, it's kind of a static piece that doesn't really progress the game or contest the board that well, so I don't exactly know how to rate it. I did decide to leave it out. It's also soft to a Stubborn Denial on curve, very soft. So I think what I would say is maybe Ashiok, but I personally did not. And then X number of Plague Engineers, where X is the number of cards you still need to bring out after you have brought these 5 in. So in this case, here's what my thoughts are. We are going to lose a land. Once more, it can be Urborg. If we do end up attacking their mana again, this is going to be mana fixing for them potentially and making their Dismembers more castable. So it's just the freest land to cut a lot of the time. And I like moving away from most discard, and I've been leaving in exactly one Thoughtseize against Grixis Shadow decks, and that feels pretty good. So if we sideboard those out, it means we get to play with only 2 Plague Men instead of 3. I think that's totally fine, and our changes would look just like that. Game 2 on the play, and it's a good hand. One more good spell at the expense of a land, and it would be a great hand, but it's a certain keep. And the opponent will mull to 6 as well, so nice to see the opponent taking a mull to even out our mull in Game 1. And we draw Hexdrinker. Definitely a good one, but we're just going to run out our Skoos here. Yes, it's vulnerable, all that stuff, but it is also vulnerable sitting in hand. I think there's a lot of instances in which you just deploy a threat. You just play out your threats, see what happens. In this case, nothing will happen. It's the opponent's second land drop, then back to us. So we'll get in there with the Skoos. They don't appear to be on an early Shadow progression, and if so, we have the tools to handle it. So a couple different things we could do here. We could actually just run out Plague Engineer to be mana efficient, but we can also be mana efficient playing Hexdrinker and putting levels on. And I opted for the latter. Plague Man can be more of a blowout if we slow roll it potentially, and Hexy forces them to kind of have an answer to at least one of these things. And if they kill the Ooze, then the Hexdrinker is going to live. If they kill the Hexdrinker, that makes the Ooze a little bit better. So I'm kind of fine with most outcomes here. Just, again, running out threats, developing the board, being mana efficient, all that good stuff. And so, yeah, as said, I'm happy with most outcomes, but not this one. We know how good this feels on our side. It feels just as bad on the other side. They get the 2/2 Death Touch that kills something on the way down. Plague Man Naming Snake. You gotta hate it when it's, you hate to see it when it's on the opponent's side. But that is alright because we draw Dark Confidant. That's gonna be a good draw, right? So we go ahead and just play a little defense here, holding up our effects. Surely Dark Confidant will get us out of this mess. Nope, the opponent's got another Plague Man. Holy moly, we are getting 2-for-1 like crazy right now. So the opponent's getting frisky with that first Plague Man over there. Plague Man going just sicko mode this matchup. We'll take the 2, and end step we are going to Decay, and I think I've just got more humans in the deck than snakes, so we'll hit the human. We'll hit the Plague Man that's naming human, to be more exact. And then after the fact, we draw this one of Thoughtseize. Well, it's still an okay draw, but man, it would have been nice to know about those Plague Men a little bit earlier, huh? So what does the opponent have? They have double Snapcaster Mage and Stubborn Denial. Well, Stubby D is a good card, but not particularly good right now that we know to play around it, and they don't have Ferocious anyway. Plus, the Snapcaster mages currently have no targets whatsoever. So until they draw like a Fatal Push or something similar, their hand is actually very bad. So we clearly take the Angler there in my view. And with no Shadow anywhere in sight, we're pretty free and clear to go ahead and start getting really aggressive with the Ooze. And I don't mind eating both of those things there. We're still holding up one activation, and we gain a couple points of life, really start cranking up the pressure, make their graveyard in general smaller for the purposes of another Angler. Opponent attacking here has got me a little bit wary, and then that's why they top deck the Fatal Push. So can't say our opponent's progressions haven't been good. So that's pretty rough. We could have, maybe should have eaten a land there, just again, generally to shrink their graveyard, but that's okay. We draw a Tarmogoyf. Well, that's a good one, but it's of course going to die to Snap Push. So instead, we are going to play Plague Man, naming human, deliberately trading it off with a Snapcaster. So not only is that kind of a fine trade overall, it's one of their 2-for-1s for one of our potential 2-for-1s. It also gets that flashback Fatal Push out of the way, and hopefully will clear the way for our Goyf at some point in the near future. Opponent's Plague Man continuing to come at us. We draw Peatland, sure. Let's play the Goyf. And here I like just passing. It's good against discard to simply pass. And the opponent's just going to run out a Snapcaster Mage. So that's definitely fine with me. That's something we can certainly live with. Looks like they might be flooded. They run out of Mire, and they're just going to pass. So, actually, scratch that. They're going to take an option on their own end step. It looks like they were going to pass, and then they thought better of it. Maybe they didn't want to let us untap, or who knows, but they decide to K-command on their own end step, forcing us to discard, buying back a snap. Well, we can't do anything about the bought back snap, and the K-command snap loop is definitely rough, but we can at least fire off the trophy, turn that K-command into a simple raise dead or whatever it is. Then back to us, sadly, it's a land that we find. It's a mere land. So let's attack with the Goyf before we give them any more info. Them throwing the chump block in front of it is fine with me. That's kind of what we wanted. I think we're just competing as much as possible on the value axis. That said, they're also happy with it because they can flash back this K-command, buy the other one back. The loop is pretty rough. But our Peatland finds us a great, great card. The first appearance of the league, if I'm not mistaken, of Tireless Tracker. Yes, K-command can kill it, but this is just another way to continue digging through the deck, right? So we make a clue, we pass. Opponents cantripping with Wraith and Bauble, and then what? Well, then it's the dreaded loop of Snap K-command before we get to untap, of course. Buying back another Snap, killing Tracker, and then playing D with the existing Snap. Then drawing with Bauble, so it's a great turn. They are still on Stubborn Denial, worth noting. So let's attack. Once again, I'm fine with this. You know, maybe at this stage there was more of an incentive to crack a clue first, just to see if we can find a kill spell, but even if we do, I don't know if it's worth doing. I think we might be priced into saving kill spells for shadows at this stage of the game. We crack our clue, finding another land. Not the greatest, but hey, you know what is the greatest? This thing. Tarmogoyf. Got a couple Goyfs down, staring down the opponent. And what do they have? They've got another Plague Man, so they're on 3 copies. By the way, when I saw this, it does make me want to revise sideboarding if we can take them to game 3. Maybe pair back on Dark Confidant, especially because we're going to be on the draw. At least a 1 copy, right? Just don't want to set ourselves up for the blowout. But speaking of the blowout, how about these Tireless Trackers? Really worth their weight in gold at this stage of the game. We're going to go for the main phase fetch. Sometimes you'd want to play around removal by not doing that. But if they point removal at Tracker just to stop the second clue, that's actually very risky with their life total so low and with the Tracker as the only summoning sick one. So I'd rather make the clue now, accepting that the blowout is potentially there, but also kind of fine for us. We're going to crack a clue main phase, even though it's bad against opposing discard, because we could also find Fatal Push and just try to win right now. But we don't, so instead we'll just attack. Plague Man will trade off. Opponent's down to 2. Over to them, and they're fetching down to 1 to get Revolt for push on Tracker. And then, wouldn't you know it, they found another snap. So the opponent's value has been absolutely insane. And they still have that Stubborn Denial in hand. But hey, we draw Liliana the Veil. Good draw. Great draw, even. We do have the luxury first of cracking this clue. And we draw Fatal Push. Alright, that's pretty cool. So we'll play the Lily. And I like doing this before showing them anything else. So they are going to go for the soft stub. And I'm pretty happy with that because we, of course, just pay for it. And then we get to do everything here. We get to play out our final land. We get to push the snap. That means we get to take Lily up, put her to 4. This is better against other threats off the top from the opponent. And look at that. They rip one right away, a Death Shadow. So we'll pretty happily edict that away. And then what a good draw Scavenging Ooze is. Yep, Scooz should have really put this game away. And just to be certain of that, we're going to main phase outsize any potential K commands or lightning bolts off the top while also holding up a couple activations. So I kind of like the happy medium there of sitting this at a 4-4. Opponent will, having lost their stubby D to the +1, pass with 1 unknown in hand. And then I think the safe thing to do playing around Snapcaster Mage is simply to attack first. We could also run out Peatland first. Maybe should have, actually, just in case we need to crack that at instant speed for any reason. But let's just attack. And the opponent does have a K command trying to buy back a Snapcaster Mage. Well, we get to go ahead and eat the snap in response, and that is going to do for the opponent. So what an epic game. It was a pretty good game 1, too. Despite our flood, it was really close. This was an epic game 2. Going to turn 13. Opponent looping snaps and cryptics, finding Fatal Push right off the top at the crucial time. Snap push, lots of Snapcasters off the top, and they killed our Hexdrinker and our Dark Confidant outright by playing a Plague Man 2 turns back to back. But we still got there, and we were actually kind of far ahead by the end of it, simply because the pressure of Tarmogoyf, the advantage of Tireless Tracker, and our own interaction, including, as always, Liliana of the Veil, was able to keep pace. So what a great game, but the series is not over. Game 3 awaits. And here it is. We're going to be on the draw, and the hand is pretty good. I did bring back another discard spell. This one was an Inquisition. As I mentioned, the heavy presence of Plague Man made me tone down on the Dark Confidants. I think you could side out on the draw either 1 or 2 bobs. What you want to bring in, you could bring in, I did bring in a second discard spell, you could even maybe bring in a third, or you could bring in the third Plague Man, a couple different ways you could treat that. Also, if you like Ashiok here, you could play a 1 of Ashiok as well. Opponent will cycle and pass. We will draw another utility land, which is okay, and then try to Inquisition, but opponent is going to fetch and trade off a stubby D for it. Back to us after a land drop, and we draw Trophy. Okay, so I'm going to slow roll the threats here. No need to hold up Trophy quite yet, in my view. No need to play out the Hexdrinker quite yet. We know how that can go. So we're just going to play utility land. Opponent's on red mana now, and then they're going to fetch and shock for the Royal Scion, so they can +1 to loot. They can also +1 to give something +2/+0, first strike, trample. And then their ult is actually pretty scary in a value matchup because it's a draw 4 more than anything. But it can also, kill a Liliana or just do a bunch of damage to us. So right now the opponent doesn't get any direct advantage off it. They just cycle through the deck a little bit more. Pitching a Braid. Okay, we draw Thoughtseize. So it was actually a really interesting question before that draw. Do we play Liliana because it's the window to resolve her, and she is our best card in this matchup? I'm pretty sure. Or do we trophy the Scions before they get more value? Now, I think because we did draw Thoughtseize and it's a really good window for that, we're happier to go on that plan, and we can maybe clear the way for Liliana the following turn. They don't have a Stubborn Denial anyway, so what do they have? They have Shadow. We don't care about that. We do have the Liliana Edict for it. They have Thought Scour, which is just a redraw. They have Dismember, which we can sequence around. So I think taking the Shadow is actually still kind of relevant because they could draw more threats and overload us. But look, K-Command can buy the Shadow back anyway. So I think we're just supposed to take the 2-for-1 of K-Command there. And then we're going to trophy the Scions now. Again, we could wait till the draw step, but in this case they could draw a stub. So we're going to be safe, rather safe than sorry, and just get rid of them while we can. Opponent drew a land, and then they're going to Thought Scour, and then they're going to play Shadow. And then they're going to play another Shadow, so that was quite the find. That's what I meant about them overloading us. So now what do we do? Well, their only card in hand is Dismember. So I think we do want to try to set up a turn where we can make Hexdrinker good. So for that reason, I'm inclined to be a little bit more mana efficient and play the Liliana out here. So even though we cannot protect her, we're just kind of trading her 1-for-1 with a Shadow. I think that's fine to be mana efficient, and also to extend the game, it lets us take a few more hits potentially in the long run if they feel pressed into removing her, which of course they do. So even though normally we like to try to play Protect the Queen with Lily in this matchup, I don't think we were quite able to. Opponent finds a Plague Man, and they're going to name Human, and we are extremely rewarded for that decision by drawing another Liliana. So, of course, here we get to play Lily, Edict, and then we get to trophy away whatever they don't sacrifice. And once again, we're not messing around. We're just going to main phase it in case they draw Stubby D. Opponent's got nothing. It's going to be back to us. And we know they have at least one removal spell in hand. There's no real way to play around it. We're just going to dump out our hand here. And then take Liliana up. Not much we can do. And of course the opponent happened to draw another removal spell. So hey, once again, you can't say that their progressions haven't been good. Both decks looking really strong. This is a really close, really cool series thus far. But when the dust settles, we are quite far ahead because we have 3 impactful utility lands on the field plus a Liliana too. And we have equal amounts of lands as the opponent. They get the first draw, though, so they're just going to pass. We draw basic, not very good. Let's tick up. We get a Dismember out of their hand. Very, very nice. So now it's actually another really interesting question as to whether we start attacking with the Treetop Village or activating Castle. I actually think attacking with Treetop is pretty legit because it's not like turning on Shadow, making it that much bigger, is that terrifying with our Liliana, able to Edict and still survive. That said, I do still think that the safer and overall stronger thing to do is just to draw a card for only 1 life. When we're already at 18 life, seems really good to just keep accruing advantage. Once more, we main phase it because there's a lot of things that reward us for doing so. Peatland, not exactly one of them, but it's fine. Opponent cantrips a couple times, and at the end of the day, all they have to show for it is a polluted delta, so we are just fine with that. We are drawing lands as well. Not the best, but we get to play the Peatland, and then I almost reflexively just cracked the Peatland, but I think it's better with all of our mana sinks on board and in the deck to activate Castle instead. And we draw Tarmogoyf, and this would have let us still hold up Peatland if we wanted to. But Tarmogoyf is a great draw. We're just going to play it out. Sitting pretty with our Liliana on 4, and then the opponent fetches, which I think was probably a punt because now they're just dead to Tarmogoyf if they don't have something to do this turn, and they don't. So I understand wanting to thin out the deck in that situation, but I think since we were presenting exactly lethal if they fetched, probably not supposed to, but either way, I do not envision any world in which the opponent could realistically come back from that. So feels great. What a fun match. That was definitely a sweet one. Told you guys this was a pretty cool league. I hope you are enjoying it. I did enjoy playing it, despite my plans to live record it having been ruined. This time we were not blown out by Plaguemen. and we just kind of sequenced our way to victory. Fortunate to see both of the 2 discard spells that were in our deck early. That's definitely sweet. And also Liliana of the Veil. Drawing the second one off the top right after we edicted with the first one, then lost it, that was huge. So our progression was great, and we got there. We are 2-1 in the league. See you for round 4. Okay, my friends, round 4, we're back to losing the die roll, and we're taking them all. You know, we've lost a lot of die rolls, and we've taken a lot of mulligans this league, just pointing that out, but the deck is still performing pretty well. That said, this is a pretty poor 6, but you know, if there's one card that can unmulligan us, I guess it's Dark Confidant, so I did keep it. Bottom Urborg, but obviously not very confident with a hand like this. And the opponent goes turn 1 Noble Hierarch. So whatever they're up to, they are going to ramp. And there's nothing we can do about it. So at least we draw some 1-mana action. It is Hexdrinker. How good it will prove to be, I don't know, but we certainly play it out. Opponent attacking with the Hierarch. Now, this is extremely interesting. I thought for a long time about whether to take this block. I would have Snap cast a Fatal Push on the Noble Hierarch if I had drawn it, no question. So I was like, this is the opponent giving me the chance to turn my Hexdrinker into a Fatal Push. But I thought about it and said, well, number one, I don't know what they're up to. They could be some, like, weird Naya, aggro deck that has some kind of a combat trick for all I know. Or they could just be pretty flooded and pretty happy to make that trade. So thought long and hard about it, but then said, nah, you know what, let's just take the 1. Granted, I don't care much about taking the 1 one way or the other, but the point is we missed the chance to kill Hierarch. We'll see how it goes. Opponent plays Duskwatch Recruiter, which makes me regret not taking the trade, but who knows what else they had, and it also makes the attack seem a little bit weird, but this looks like a devoted combo deck, and of course the mana demands of Duskwatch make Noble Hierarch a good card for the opponent to have around. At this point, I'm happy to trade Hexy for the Recruiter, but opponent will not take the trade, so we just go Dark Confidant. We've drawn another one. Could be okay, could be less than great. Really just want to draw interaction from here on out. Opponent main phasing an activation, which lends credence to the theory that they are a bit flooded. They find a Spellskite. Okay. Not that concerned about it, I guess. Then they're going to hit us for 3 Exalted, and they will transform because no spells have been cast. Bob will flip a Goyf, and we draw land. That's some pretty bad stuff, especially because Goyf is only a 1/2, so the play here is to simply pump all the levels into the snake, and the race is on. We hit the opponent for 6, and they don't want to jump block, so back to them. They're going to cast a 1-mana Spellskite. The Howler hits us back for 4, and then it's back to us. So a really unusual game. Both decks kind of not quite doing their thing, but at the same time developing a board presence that's reasonably strong. Bob flips have been extraordinarily painful, but hey, he's finding us the action we need. It's a Liliana of the Veil. So what do we do here? Well, a few different options. We could have a double spell turn, but the double spell turn is not as appealing as it looks because we're only able to go Bob Goyf, or we would have had to fetch for a forest. And with our life total so low and with Bob triggering every turn, neither of those seems appealing. So I did decide to commit to the Liliana Edict plan. And with that in mind, this is the best attack. We have Bob back to block, and whether it's blocking for Liliana or just chumping to stay alive, either way, we'll attack with Hexdrinker first, drawing out a chump block of its own, and then it makes the Liliana Edict a fair amount better. So we get to Edict away the Skite, pump another level into the snake, and it's back to the opponent. They could have a whole lot here, but for only 3 mana, I don't really know what it could be. And it's nothing yet, so maybe they are just kind of flooded. I don't know. Don't know what they could have, but they do play a Walking Ballista. After a great deal of deliberation, as I recall, they play Ballista, they're going to shoot the Bob, and then they're going to play an Eternal Witness, buying back Noble Hierarch, and then recasting Hierarch, so just going as wide as possible, one assumes, and trying to aggro us out. And to be fair, they're pretty close to doing so because that Exalted trigger makes that a 4/4. We're now dead to either the Howler or the Witness. And Howler will switch back, transform back, the night is over, right? But we'll take up Lily, pitch one of these fetch lands. And then, you know, we're dead to a lot of things here, but we can still attack with a Hexdrinker because if the opponent is planning to aggro us out, they're probably going to take this hit. And if they do, then they're dead to Hexdrinker becoming level 8 next turn. It requires a lot to go right, but I think this is our best route to victory. And, you know, because we don't really have much else in hand besides this Goyf and this trophy. Bob is kind of a liability at this point, so we just play the Goyf, put a level on Hexy, and pass holding up trophy, and we're dead to a Path to Exile, we're dead to other ways to get rid of the Goyf even just for the turn. Opponent will find Devoted Druid off of an activation, but that's not that scary at the moment. And they're going for the win, so we assign a block on the Witness, and then after assigning a block, we trophy the Recruiter, and the opponent just scoops it up. So remember, we mulled to a 5-land, 6-card hand with only Dark Confidant against a combo deck. And we had no interaction for the first, 3-4 turns at least. So it was a minor miracle that we did get there. The opponent obviously could have comboed off. At any point that they found it, we couldn't have done much about it except maybe on this turn. But just goes to show you the power of being proactive, the power of having a floor of okay, these things attack and block. That turn 1 Hexdrinker didn't look like the best. I almost traded it off with a Hierarch, but it actually gave us a really good turn 3 when otherwise we weren't doing much on that turn, becoming a level 4 early, and now it would have forced the damage through this turn upcoming to win the game. So minor miracle, as said, that we got there, but we did indeed get there. Good stuff from Bob finding us more action, and the core cards pulling the rest of the weight. Goyf, Bob, Liliana. Gotta love it. So good game, and let's take a look at how we side. Okay, so against Devoted combo, this is the theme of the league, I guess, right? Sideboard against what you have seen. So I think these 7 cards should basically always be in as long as you have room for them. They cannot combo off with Plague Man naming Human, which is going to shut off Vizier of Remedies, and just generally be very good against their plethora of X1 humans. It also has other good things to name in other situations. Awesome card. Once again, we have a good matchup for the Rider. Just more removal and eventual 2-for-1. Kalidas can really take over a game against a deck like this. Decay is just more removal. Brutality. So obviously this is going to kill weenies, but they do play a fair amount of non-creature spells. You can see everything in these decks from Collected Company to Eladamri's Call to Finale of Devastation to Court of Calling, right? Think we want Brutality in here to take those things away. Now, these are the more fringe slots. They are all playable, but this is going to be dependent on what you've seen. If they are super grindy and even playing a lot of Finks of their own, I kind of like our own Finks. If they are really heavy on Finks and on Eternal Witness and stuff like that, then a Nihil Spellbomb is a pretty good way to disrupt that while staying value neutral. And if they do play the graveyard effects that are a little bit slower, plus a high number of search the library effects, whether it be like Eladamri's Call and Court of Calling, then you could play an Ashiok. But in Game 1, they didn't really show us much of any of that stuff besides a little bit of graveyard action with Ewit, right? So until we know more, I think I would sideboard relatively conservatively, and we're still bringing in 7 cards, right? So when you already have that many good cards to bring in, I think it's fine to err on the side of caution with the other stuff. And here I did decide to side out a land on the draw. I think that's fine enough when you're on 24 land in this matchup. I think cutting 1 Lily on the draw is fine, and I think cutting 1 QB is fine. I still like leaving in 1 because it's very good along the ground and closing out the game, but the Planeswalker clause is probably not going to be relevant here, so I think cutting 1 from the top end, getting a little leaner is good. And to that end, I am trimming around the edges at some of the other mana sinks that are maybe not at the very best. Even though Hexdrinker was great last game, I can still see cutting 1. And we also hedge with our discard spells down to 4. Still able to disrupt them quite well, but a little more geared toward top decking better. So there's an argument for cutting a 3rd discard spell, leaving in Hexdrinker. There's an argument for playing any number of these cards, and it's definitely tricky to sideboard optimally against Devoted combo. But based on what we saw in Game 1, here's what we'll do for Game 2, and if they show us anything interesting in Game 3 and they win, then we might have to revisit the sideboarding protocol. But for now, this is what I would do. Alrighty, so we are on the draw, and our hand is great if it was on the play. On the draw, it's a little bit borderline just because we're not interacting until turn 3. But look, we've had so many half-functional hands this game that I'm kind of more inclined to keep this than maybe I would be if this was round 1, game 1. I said this game, I meant this league. We've had so many half-functional hands this league, and so many unsuccessful mulligans this league, or forced mulligans. So this is a borderline, and I'm leaning more toward keeping it in general. And then we see that the opponent has mulliganed to 6, and for all we know, they could go even lower. So that solidifies it that I'm going to keep this. But we are very soft to the early combo, right? So the opponent stays at 6, turn 1 Hierarch, you got it. So obviously we just want to draw interaction. We have all the value we need. We have all the lands we need. Just want to draw interaction. Instead we draw another land. So not the greatest, but we go Blooming Marsh, pass to the OP. And Wooded Foothills, fetching main phase, then attacking. Okay, don't know what to make of that necessarily, but maybe it just doesn't matter. And then they go Devoted Druid. So they're setting themselves right up for the combo. Let's draw some kind of a kill spell here, please. And we draw another Dark Confidant. So the keep is extremely punished so far, but maybe they won't have the combo, right? Right? What are they going to do? What are they going to do here? So, Finale of Devastation, searching for Vizier of Remedies. Well, okay, they have the combo. Maybe they won't have a payoff, right? Right? They have the payoff. We have to make them show us the payoff, though. We won't make them click through the entire combo enough to kill us, but we will have to see a payoff. And it's a Chord of Calling for 6, getting Shalai, Voice of Plenty, which of course is going to protect the board, and they can make everything infinite power toughness. So we are just absolutely dead. No outs, and we got turn 3'd, so that's what we get for keeping a hand without interaction. And again, if the opponent hadn't mulled, if they had kept 7, I would say, well, maybe we're supposed to keep, but if they go to 6, they could have a non-functional 6 and have to go to 5. They could just keep any 6 with lands and spells and not necessarily have the turn 3 combo. Therefore, I think if they don't combo off on us early, and or if we kind of have an average draw, we are able to compete, and then we are virtually guaranteed to win a long game with a hand like this. So I think that's a fine keep on the draw, but we sure did get punished for it. And yeah, that's what we were afraid of game 1. We managed to fade the combo G1, but here in G2, they T3'd us. So what are you going to do except go to game 3? In game 3, now we're talking, my friends. We're on the play. We got 3 lands, 3 kill spells, and a Kalitas. I mean, this is kind of the dream. This is kind of the dream. Now, granted, might even be better to have discard or have like a turn 2 Confidant or something, but let's not be too greedy. This hand is sweet. So we even get to play the Tomb painlessly, and we have the Urborg to make Peatland painless. So this is just like we drew it up so far. And there's a Tarmogoyf, sure, that's okay. We're going to decay the bird because we're flush with removal, and we just want to slow them down. Now, we could have Brutality, but I would rather wait for a better spot for Brutality where I know that escalating is either right or wrong. There it would have been a crapshoot, and we probably would have been pitching Goyf to do so. We ran the risk of whiffing with the discard mode, just didn't seem correct, so we're just going to be a little more patient with that. We draw Murderous Rider. This guy's showing up a ton this league. Gotta love it, and the opponent having done nothing does kind of give us the window to play a Goyf here, which I'm pretty much a fan of. And the fact that they did nothing means that we were suspicious for exactly this, Path to Exile, which works out great for us. It guarantees us our 4th land for Kalitas, and it means that they didn't path Kalitas, they only path the Goyf. So, seems fine to me. And the opponent's got another bird and another land. No big deal. And we draw Blooming Marsh, so while it is a little scary to go shields down, this is definitely our spot. This is our spot to play Kalitas and get the 5th land down, and then hope we get to untap and go to town. Opponent does not have land number 4, nor do they make another play, so they could be holding up a couple different things. We draw another kill spell, so this is just what we like. We just got piles and piles of removal. There is a little bit more of an argument for Brutality, but again, we're just not sure whether or not it's going to whiff, and we don't necessarily want to escalate, but we also don't want to not use it as a kill spell, especially with Kalitas down. So a lot to think about. Let's just attack. Our hand is almost too good for our own good, if you know what I mean. But we attack, we connect, we gain the life, and then I'm pretty cool just passing here, honestly. Alright, I'm back. Had to take a phone call, sorry about that. So as I believe I was saying, we are just passing, because we do have the luxury of doing so with 2 instant speed removal spells. See what the opponent comes up with. And it is a collected company, so like I said in the deck tech, you never quite know what their non-creature spells are going to be until you see them, it seems. And then they do indeed Coco, and they go Spellskite and Duskwatch Recruiter. So I think we need to at least kill the Recruiter before they get to untap. So we're going to do it with, we're of course going to target. If they redirect with Spellskite, then they had to spend 2 life to do so, and then maybe we trophy the Recruiter. Or if they just let it go, they do just let it go, then I think we pass and hold up trophy just in case they have a more high-impact thing than Spellskite in need of removing, right? So, but once again, they're just going to pass. Looks like maybe another collected company, but I want to be mana efficient here, so we'll go ahead and trophy. It's a little bit risky, actually, to do that because our other effects are sorcery speed, but we can always maybe force the issue on our turn, and either way, we've got a really good value plan going with this Kalitas, right? So now's the time. Dark Confidant's very good in this spot, honestly, but it's also a free enough pitch. We don't really need it. We can win with what's on board plus the Rider quite easily. So we do escalate the Brutality. Now, assuming they have to be on at least 1 non-creature spell, maybe multiples, and worst case scenario, we get to force it out of their hand on our own terms and then answer whatever they find with Pulse, right? So let's go ahead and do that. And the opponent's hand is Court of Calling, Collected Company, BOP, Eternal Witness. So a powerful hand, but one that is going to struggle to get the wheels turning against our board and our really oppressive suite of removal. And I think the opponent was probably supposed to Coco here in response, because the court is not looking particularly good right now. And so, of course, we will take the Coco. And then we don't even need to play the Pulse this turn. We just get to jam the Rider. Jamming the Murderous Rider, swinging in for a ton with our board, and the opponent is losing 24-6. They're going to play the Birds of Paradise out as an act of defiance, and then they're going to scoop. So, as I say, I think they probably should have Coco'd in response there, but we should still have had our bases well and truly covered with the Maelstrom Pulse. Can't imagine them getting there. You know, maybe if they had been able to answer Kalitas, then we would be, then their Eternal Witness and them drawing more stuff off the top, they could have theoretically got there. But as things stood, oh boy, this was the dream. We just had Kalitas when the dust settled, when the Goyf was pathed, when we'd made our land drops. Kalitas backed up by a pile of removal. What more can you want against a creature deck? That was a real feel-good win, my friends. And that does take us to 3-1 in this league, and we are playing for the 4-1. See you in round 5. And here we go. 5th and final round of this debut league with the Throne of Eldraine tech, and we are on the play. We've got a solid keep as long as they're playing to the board. But look, even if they're not playing to the board, at least we have turn 3 Liliana. And let's be real, most decks in Modern do play to the board. Opponent took a mulligan and then play Cavern of Souls Naming Human into Aether Vial. So, opponent is indeed on 5-color humans, we assume. And we draw another land. So what does that make us want to do? Well, We are actually kind of light on action relative to the amount of cards in our hand, so a big part of me wants to just hold up Decay and Trophy for actual creatures and let the Vial go. But because we are going to be leaning so heavily on Lily, that's what put me over the edge into Decaying Vial, just because Vial helps them play around Liliana so much better. And the opponent's got Horizon Canopy into Thalia's Lieutenant. Sadly, we draw yet another land, so we're flooded. But we do get the Lily Edict on the play, very good. The thing that punishes us for this sequencing is if they have a Mantis Rider, and you know that's what they've got. They always do. They always do, right? So Mantis Rider strikes back, Liliana goes down, and we draw yet another land. What is going on with some of this flood this league? 24 lands, I'll tell you, it's a little rough. But we need them. We need our lands because they bring utility. And there's a great example. We catch the Horizon Canopy while it's tapped out, no redraw for you. And they just have another one, so the opponent kind of answering us at most stages here with kind of the things they need, but hey, we get to trophy the Rider, and now we're out of gas. So the opponent's got 3 cards in hand. Let's hope they're a little flooded too. They go Ether Vial pass. Maybe they are. I don't know why they wouldn't crack Canopy, but maybe we'll find out. We draw Fatal Push. That is a good card in the matchup, but doesn't help us develop a more proactive game plan. We're just kind of hoping to continue hitting more good cards besides it. Opponent will then crack Canopy next turn, so yeah, not sure why they didn't crack it there. Another option here is that they're sitting on things like Reflector Mage that they're loath to run out kind of without getting the value out of it first, or Phantasmal Images, stuff like that. So either they're flooded or they've got those more conditional cards in hand. And it's back to us. We're so flush with mana that we decide not to push Thalia there. Drawing Hexdrinker does punish us for that a little bit, but how could we have known we were going to do that? It would just be nice to have all of the mana this turn, of course, to pump into Hexy, right? But we still get to have a pretty good turn of putting it to 3 while holding up push and paying for the Thalia attacks, right? So Hexdrinker, good draw. And the opponent will indeed have a Reflector Mage for us. So bouncing the Hexy, playing a Noble Hierarch. And then we're going to go ahead and push Thalia in the beginning of combat because even though we've got all the mana in the world to pay for her attacks, it still could be annoying, especially once we're playing Hexdrinker back. And this just saves us 3 life this turn. You know, it's just kind of the most high-value card on their board. We will draw Inquisition. It may or may not whiff, but this is by far the best window for it, right? This could very easily connect. Sadly, the opponent happens to have a 2-drop they can vial in, and it's Phantasmal Image. So not that scary, but still a whiff, still a big old brick for our draw step. And our draws have not been good. We've flooded and we've drawn not much else that's great, but we have interacted well enough early that the opponent just finally does their first damage here on turn 7, and then they play a Champion of the Parish. You got it. So we draw Scavenging Ooze. Pretty good draw. Pretty great draw, actually. We get to go Hexdrinker and Scooze, go get our other forest, and then we want to put at least some levels into Hexdrinker right here, right now. We're not, of course, playing around any instants at against the 5-color Humans deck, especially Game 1. So I think just leaving it at 2, leaving 2 Scooze activations open is a pretty fine compromise. With the prospect of more Reflectors, we don't necessarily want to go all in on either permanent prematurely anyway, right? But what this does not play around is another Noble Hierarch, actually, because now they can attack with double Exalted, making it a 4/5, and we don't have a good block. So yes, we could, in theory, have left up yet another Scooze activation for this, but I think it's fine, you know. You can't play around literally everything. They happen to sneak a little damage across. What can you do? I'll tell you what we can do. We can respond by getting angry and summoning the QB, the Questing Beast, has been summoned. What a top deck. What a great top deck. Now, granted, not a strictly necessary one because we had good mana sinks on the board already, but look, this allows us to have an amazing turn if you just take a moment to run the numbers like I did and just look at the board state. This allows us to attack with everything. We've got 3 4/4s coming across. They can double block Hexdrinker and engineer a trade that way, but that's fine with me because we no longer need Hexdrinker to win the game. They cannot profitably block Skoos because we've got activations, and of course QB cannot even be stopped by this board and sits back on defense, so QB just flipping the script on the opponent here, forcing a double chump block. Very, very desperate for a humans player to double chump block when their life total is still that high. But that just shows you how under the gun they are thanks to our big green dummies. And then they just scoop it up. So, wow. I mean, Hexdrinker was good. Skoos was very good. And QB was the coup de grace. Gotta love it. We had all the interaction early. That was nice. Then we flooded, but we had stalled the opponent enough to find some really good top decks, and boy, did they put the game away, so that one felt good. Questing Beast really flexing on the humans player there. That was awesome. So, as you may know, humans is one of my favorite matchups on the Rock. It's just good, clean magic. Pretty 50-50-ish in the past, but honestly, these days it feels more favored ever since Plague Man was printed. Humans aren't necessarily quite as grindy as they once were. We're not seeing as many Militia Buglers, for instance. That works to our favor. And now we've got QB on top of everything else, so it might tip us into a pretty moderate favorite overall, especially on a build like mine. But hey, they're still a top-tier deck. We still need to figure out how to sideboard against them. Let's do that. Okay, my friends, so you saw how we took care of them game 1, and granted, it won't always go that way, especially game 1, but we get so much stronger post-side no matter what happens in game 1, especially on this build. So we have 8 cards that are all slam dunks. Plague Man against a tribal deck, obviously a bomb. Kalidas, we saw how good he is against small creatures last round. Kitchen Finks, humans attacks mostly along the ground, despite Mantis Rider and Freebooter shenanigans. Finks is very, very good here. And then we've just got more kill spells. The Decay, the 2-for-1 of Rider, and the Flex of Collective Brutality. The big problem we have here is we have too many good cards to bring in and not necessarily as many that we want to come out. But it's it's a lot easier to facilitate 8 out on the draw. So to break this down a little further, I think 3 Thoughtseize just comes out no matter what. But honestly, the rest of these cards are fine. I think player draw, we can move away from some of the slower mana sinks like Tracker and or ones that are more vulnerable to the blowout of Reflector Mage or Deputy of Detention like Hexy. Dark Confidant and Liliana of the Veil both get way better on the play. But here on the draw, since we have so many great cards to come in, I'm pretty happy going down to 2 Lily and 2 Bob. If they do take us to Game 3, we're back on the play. We might want to bring back the 3rd Bob, the 3rd Lily, and then it gets a little bit trickier to find out exactly what is optimal. I'm not exactly sure, but that requires maybe a little bit further testing. But for the game you are about to see, we've got these 8 coming out, these 8 coming in. Our humans opponent here in Game 2 on the play will keep 7, as will we. The hand is very good. The mana's a little bit less than ideal. We could use, more green for Skoos and all that stuff, and maybe not want to take the pain of fetching, but that's a minor complaint. We've got Push, we've got Plague Man, we've got a couple mana sinks, including Skoos, which is a very good one in this matchup, so life is good, and we draw Brutality. So opponent has played Horizon Canopy turn 1, which leads me to believe they're on a relatively land-light progression, but we'll see. They could always, of course, draw more. Either way, there's not much we can do besides hold up Fatal Push here. Oh, I should mention the reason I did run out the fetch land instead of Urborg. So we suspected they might be on a land-light progression. The notion of fixing their mana with Urborg is potentially not good, because maybe they could play something they might otherwise not be able to if we do play Urborg, and or it could be painless relative to the pain of Canopy. So even though we might be pricing ourselves into Affection Shock, I still like that rather than playing out Urborg. And we can't push anyway because Thalia is going to tax us, so we just get our Tomb painlessly, which is really nice. And it's back to the opponent. Or rather, the opponent passes back to us. We draw Field of Ruin, and we could push for Thalia, but I did decide to take a a window here to play the Scooze. I'm sorry, did I say we drew Field of Ruin? It's been a long video. I think we drew Maelstrom Pulse, and we play Field of Ruin. Opponent's got the Hierarch on the end step, so they're curving out really well. This is the scary curve out of humans on the play. They've got the Ramp, the Tax, the Vial, and now the Freebooter to Disrupt. So they take away just our cheapest kill spell, trying to cramp our style. And then they have Mantis Rider, so this is just how they draw it up. This is a classic, very, very good humans curve out. And they get to smack us for 5. Not much we can do about it besides chump, which we're not going to. We draw Finks, good stabilizer, but a little underwhelming against the Flyers, and we don't have double green anyway. So what on earth do we do here? Well, I think all we really can do is play the best card in our deck in the matchup, which is the Plague Man, a casual 2-for-1, destroying, well, 3-for-1 so far. Just on the face of 3-for-1, and shrinking the opponents enough to slow their clock down and to allow our Scooze a free attack. They could have traded off Rider with Scooze, and in some situations that would be kind of bad for us, but here, because we have such a good hand and such little green mana, we're not going to realistically be activating the Scooze all that much in the near future, so I would have loved that trade. Opponent doesn't take it, they just take 2 instead. The Charming Prince Charming himself, they can't resist him. He's in every deck now, and here he is, just a nice, well-rounded flex bear in the human tribe. And once again, he'll scry 2 like he's been doing against us all day. Rider hitting us for only 2 because of the Plague Man. And then we draw Swamp. So, what do we do here? We've got Field of Ruin that we can activate to fix our own mana. We've got other things to do. What's it going to be? Well, we do have Collective Brutality here, and even though fixing the mana was an option, I still don't mind escalating and don't mind pitching the Swamp, which, unless we're using it to activate Field, is very, very redundant with our hand. We need green mana, not more black, right? So instead, I'm pretty happy to drain for 2 and kill the Rider. Definitely seems good, and that way we also get to hold up a Scooze activation, which is going to be pretty nice. Just nickel and diming them down, swinging the life totals in our favor. So our attacks get through, and that was a really nice turn. The opponent's down to 8, we're at 15, and they've still got the Plague Man to contend with. We could also, of course, have taken an alternative line of killing the Freebooter, but then the Mantis Rider, it felt loose to leave the Mantis Rider alive because they could, in theory, find a way to deal with the Plague Man, and then the Rider's a lot more of a problem. Then we have to engineer Revolt, and it could just lead to awkwardness. So instead, we just take the clean 2-for-2 there. Back to the opponent. Prince will hit us for 1, and then they're just going to pass. Vial on 3, no plays. Very interesting. We draw QB, we know how good it is, but once again, we are hamstrung by our lack of green mana. Also by our lack of a 4th mana in this particular card's case, but we are hitting for another 5. So we did that, and the, of course, option to gain 1 life and get 1 more point of damage across was available to us, but I don't think that's correct. I think in this case I'd rather just play a Balduvian Barbarians, which is what Tracker is right now, and it's fine with me. I knew the opponent had to have something. Deputy of Detention is the case here. Kind of surprised they didn't do it before damage because their life total is so low, but they're just sequencing very carefully around removal, so I respect that, but they are down to 3. They crack Canopy, they untap. What have they found this time? It is Thalia's Lieutenant. That's a very good find. It's going to buff up the board and allow them at least the prospect of some attacks, but they decide to err on the side of caution, leave the Prince behind, just get in for 2. And we draw a Swamp. Once again, can't hit the 2nd green. Very annoying, but hey, it's a 4th land, and it's some Tracker fuel, so we love that. We have some pretty decent attacks here, kind of like we have several times this league due to a combination of onboard effects and bluffing what's in the hand. We are forcing the opponent to think about a lot before they make blocks here. So Charming Prince will block the Tracker, and Thalia's Lieutenant will block, and then they're sending Deputy of Detention in front of Plagueman. So this is definitely really interesting. We could crack a clue right now looking for removal, growing the tracker, but if we assume that the Deputy is going to die to the Ooze, we're going to get the Plagueman back, we need to reorder the blockers. So I guess we don't necessarily, but it's better to reorder the blockers in case they have any kind of a 3-drop of any kind to Violin. And that is good enough for me. So while we could crack a clue now, I'd kind of rather wait and see what the opponent does. This lets us crack a clue at instant speed if they have an effect right before we go to damage. It also lets us have a main phase Maelstrom Pulse or whatever else the case may be. So even though we could buff up the tracker, maybe find a way like another kill spell to keep it alive, this is enough for me. This is totally fine. We get the Plagueman back, and we clear out the board just about. Then we get to go to the main phase, and as promised, we are going to push the freebooter, get our Fatal Push back. We're holding up push. We've got all kinds of gas in hand. We're very, very far ahead, and the opponent will just take the draw step and realize whatever they've got, it's not enough to beat the Plagueman, to beat the Ooze, to beat the push. And that's just what they know about. We still got the clue. We still got the Finks and the Beast. We had all kinds of action waiting in the wings, but Plague Engineer was MVP there in that final game. But holy moly, in this match, did the deck ever look good and feel good. So there you go, my friends. This was our Throne of Eldraine debut. We 4-1. Technically, it was a 5-1 because we were going to win the blue-white control matchup that was banished from memory, and that's a heck of a debut. So I had one or two maybe questionable decisions. I think overall the play was fine, but if you saw lines, maybe I missed something here in the rundown on the replay, of course, let me know. But otherwise, the deck feels really strong. It feels like we've hit on a winning formula right out of the gates. But let's take a closer look at that. Let's do a wrap-up. All right, folks, so there you have it, the debut, the first ever run out for the Eldraine tech, and I'm telling you, the signs are very promising. I think these cards are all going to rock. We did face a lot of the same types of matchups. We used a lot of stuff out of this column plus Decay. Not so much needing Ashiok this league, not so much needing Collector Ouphe this league, and not so much worrying about graveyards this league, but holy moly, did we ever put these small creature decks to the sword. Now, as mentioned in round one, Ponza is my boogeyman deck, and if it wasn't me against Ponza, where I always seem fated to kind of like have everything go wrong, we might be looking at a 5-0 or even a a pseudo 6-0, right, on the debut. But as it was, we will definitely be happy with this result, be happy with this debut, and that is where things stand. I see no reason to doubt any of the major conceptual underpinnings of this list that I've developed in the wake of the Eldraine cards becoming legal. Now, granted, we can always tweak, we can always change, we can always test a new thing or two, but the broad strokes of the deck, playing 24 lands, playing more mana sinks, playing this balance of effects, and the specific numbers of the new tech, 2 QB, 1 Castle, 1 Rider. Rider could easily be main deckable, but, we can tweak that maybe as the days and weeks go on. But yeah, I think Rock is back. That's what I think. I think the Rock is back. This this deck is feeling really strong again, and we can leverage these cards better, I think, than any other deck in the format, basically. Is certainly when we consider 3 of them all together. When we take them as a trio, they improve us more than they improve anyone else by far. So that was the league. Let me know, as always, what you think about any sideboarding decisions you might have any questions about. Any lines in game that you saw, again, maybe I missed something, and of course what you think about the list as a whole, and what your experiences with the new technology have been, and where you think we stand in the meta. I'm optimistic, guys. I really, truly am. So my only regret here is that we lost to Ponza. Also, guess that I regret I lost my ability to to live record this one for you, but you know what? The replays are still sweet, and here it was, so I do hope you enjoyed it. Thank you once again to our Patreon supporters for the week. Inquisitor, OD402, Confidants, Epilol, Simone Bernocchi, and Andreas Larson. Thank you, one and all, and thank you as always to all Patreon supporters, my friends. If you are enjoying this content, the work that I try to do for the community, the availability that I offer, the content I put out on a regular basis, Patreon is the best way to support me and to give back, trading value for value, just like the mid-range philosophy dictates, right? So thanks to those doing that. Please check it out if you have not already done so. There are tier rewards for doing so, and you can always like, share, comment, and sub to the channel. Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing from you, and stay tuned because we're gonna play more of this. We're gonna play more Rock. We're gonna do some donation leagues. We're gonna continue dabbling in archetypes, but I am very excited about this deck right now. We're gonna keep playing it. So stay tuned, and I will talk to you soon. Hope everybody out there has a wonderful day.